welcome to our new, I think it must be the 85th discourse which we have here through the years. So, but I don't count them anymore. But I think it is something like 85. And we are very happy that we're here. We are making history as we are starting. And so it's discourse number 1, then we have 2, 3, we have 4 altogether. And we start each of them, we started out with a reading which should fit, because it is Christians in the public square. And maybe we can say not only Christians, maybe also Muslims, maybe also Jews, maybe also other religious people. What happens when they enter the public sphere, which is between civil society and the state? That's where the television is, the radio, the campaigns, the political meetings and so on. So religious people don't have to go in there. They can just stay in their churches, privately, pray, think, and so on. But they may also decide that they want to enter the public square or the public sphere or the street, and not because something from outside, but because they want to tell other people. They want to engage in the culture wars. All the culture wars. Every day you have the public sphere, you can see it on television, a culture war about contraceptives, about stem cell research, about divorce, about abortion, and so on. There's not a day in which not religious people on one side and secular people on the other side are struggling about homosexuality, homosexual unions, and so on and so on. That's going on all the time. So religious people can, because of their own missionary spirit, because they want to bring their good news into the street, into the public sphere. And that is what we are about this time. And so we want to look into the first paradigm of Christianity. And we want to look at Paul, St. Paul, because there is a very famous moment where St. Paul does not only talk in the synagogue, and that's where he talked all the time, or in synagogues which had converted to Christianity, but he also went out into the public sphere. And where that happened once, and it may have happened in Rome and so on, but that was in Athens. So in Athens, Paul, and I think I have a little bit of a hard time to read this, but I try there. So Paul waited for them. That means his friends who followed him. He traveled ahead. And so he had arrived in Athens. And there his whole soul was revolted at the sight of a city given over to idolatry. So there comes a little Jew, probably a small little guy, very intelligent, spoke Latin, spoke the Roman language, spoke Greek, spoke Hebrew. He had studied in Jerusalem under Gamaliel, a famous professor. He went back home to Tarsus in what is Asia Minor, which is Turkey today. And during this time, Jesus taught. We don't know how long. He may have taught 3 months or 3 years. It's not entirely clear. Some of the Gospels, he did it 3 years. Others, just 3 months. So, but during that time, Paul was not there. So Paul never saw Jesus personally, and never met him personally. But when he came back, Jesus had already been executed. And Paul was one of the agents of the Synhedrion. The Synhedrion was the council in Jerusalem which governed the Jewish state before it was destroyed in the year 70, and then in 134 in the Bar Kokhba upheaval. Another Messiah who resisted the Romans and was completely annihilated and had to commit suicide with a lot of Jewish people. That was the end of the state and so on. So, nevertheless, before that happened, before the year 70, Paul was commissioned by the Synhedrion, the high priest and the councilmen, and to persecute Christians. At that time, Christians had not yet been excommunicated. Christians were excommunicated in Jaffa in the year 100. The Romans allowed part of the Synhedrion to move to Jaffa, and there they made this decision around 100 that Christians could no longer stay in the Jewish community. That was very seldom that this happened, because they had all kinds of sects, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and they tolerated them all. But the Christians did something which finally could not be accepted any longer, and they were excommunicated. But before that happened, Paul traveled around the country and prosecuted and persecuted Christians, and one was Stephanus. Stephanus, he presided over the death of Stephanus. He put his clothes down, and then he was there, and he saw how Stephanus was executed, stoned. He was stoned. And then he went through the whole country up to Damascus. It's the capital of Syria, where all the trouble is, the shooting today there. And in Damascus, he suddenly had a strange thing. He fell from his horse. I think it was a horse. Nobody knows exactly. And he became blind. And when he fell down, he had a vision. And there was that Jesus whom he had never seen. And he said, Paul, Saul was his name first, Saul, why do you persecute me? And so from this vision on, he was still blind. The Christian community took him in, and when he could see better again, they taught him about Jesus, who Jesus was. Christianity is not a religion of the book. Mohammed and others called Christianity and Judaism a religion of the book. So there are three religions of the book, but Christianity is not a religion of the book. Jesus did not, like Mohammed, receive the dictates of the archangel and then dictated it to his friends or whatever. The Gospels here in this Acts, they were written long after Jesus was dead. 1 generation, 2, 3 generations later. So Jesus didn't write anything. He could obviously read, because in Capernaum he read from Isaiah in the synagogue, which is still there. I visited once. There's still stones of the old synagogue in which Jesus preached were there. But we don't know if he could write. So Christianity is different from Judaism and Islam, that the center is a person. Moses never had this position in Judaism. Mohammed doesn't have this position. They're both considered to be human beings. They are not the Son of Man, as Jesus called himself. That is the only title which Jesus gave to himself, Son of Man. And so, nevertheless, Paul converted then in Damascus. He came back to Jerusalem. People were very distrustful because he had killed so many of them. But slowly they saw he was genuine, and the man went for 28 years or so through the whole Roman Empire, was beaten up, had shipwrecks and whatever, and trouble with the synagogue, and put into prison and so on. And his faith stayed the course. He was probably executed in Rome. He was not a simple man. Jesus said once that one should not exercise the talion. The talion is eye for eye, tooth for tooth in the book Leviticus. It goes through the whole body, leg for leg, nose for nose, and so on. And Jesus broke that. He said, don't do that. Don't do eye for eye, tooth for tooth. When somebody beats you on one cheek, hold up the other cheek, and so on. It's a very problematic thing. It is hard to understand. It's hard to translate into our situation, and so on. But Malcolm X, for instance, we could see a movie by him if you want to. He converted to Islam because he did not want to do this, hold up the other cheek. Because when these dogs of the white people hunt you, you should not hold up the other cheek, you should resist, and so on. And also, Hitler thought it would have been much better if Europe had become Muslim because of this holding up the other cheek. But when Jesus teaches something like that, it's always questionable what he's doing. Does he do what he said? Well, he didn't exactly. When Jesus was before the Sanhedrin, somebody of the servants there beat him on one cheek. He did not hold up the other cheek. He said, why are you beating me? He wants to have the reason for this. And with Paul, who knew this, that Jesus had taught that, he was before the Sanhedrin, and there he did some tricky things, because he knew that the Sanhedrin was split between those who believed in the resurrection, which was a Pharisaic teaching, and those who did not, which were the Sadducees. And so what he said, he stood up and he said, it is because of the resurrection that I am here, standing up here, and so on. And he knew exactly that they would get shouting each other now and would pull their beards and so on. And he, instead of holding up the cheek, he made an attack when they tried to beat him and so on. So, and then he did the worst to them. He appealed to the occupation force. He somehow despised the authority of the Sanhedrin for whom he had worked, and then applied to the Roman Empire. He wanted to be judged by the emperor's court, and so the Romans paid for it, and they sent him to Rome, and he lived in Rome for a while, and then at least the tradition is that he was executed there. He was a Roman citizen, he could not be crucified, and Peter was crucified, but he was crucified upside down. So there is the tradition that both of them were in Rome, and the church to which we belong here, which is in union with Rome, believes that there is an apostolic succession, and that from Peter on, then all the popes, there's about 250 today or so, that we are in this apostolic tradition from Peter on. So, but we don't want to go into this. Here we have a moment in the life of Paul. Paul made a tremendous breakthrough without which Christianity would have remained a small little Jewish sect. He said that one could become Christian without circumcision. He canceled some of the dietary laws. The Jews have 313 mitzvot, and maybe 314. The 314th one is new, where Fackenheim in Toronto added it to it, and he said a Jew must act in such a way that he does not give Hitler a posthumous victory. The state of Israel gives Hitler one posthumous victory after the other, unfortunately. So that's the 614th ones. But the others are all taken from the first, or the 5 books of Moses, and which were not written by Moses. And so it sums it all up, like the Sharia law or so, and every Jew has to obey this. But Paul canceled some of them, and they made it easier for Greeks for non-Jews to enter Christianity, and that helped a lot. So, nevertheless, here we are. He goes into that city in Athens. He goes through the streets. He had seen an altar standing before the door of Athens, and the altar was devoted to the Theon Agnaton, the unknown God. In the different religions, you have always 2 traditions with each other. One is what is called, with a strange word, is called the apophatic God. The apophatic God is unknown, is hidden. And then you have a kataphatic God, like Allah, who reveals himself through the Holy Quran, or like Yahweh, who speaks through Moses. So the God reveals himself. That is called a kataphatic God. When the God is silent and does not speak and reveals his dark side and so on, then it is called apophatic. So it is even, both things are together. So for instance, Paul goes into Athens, and he says to the people on the Areopag, the Stoics and the Epicureans, he said, look, I came into the city and I saw that altar. I have come to bring you, to reveal to you the unknown God. And then he reveals the unknown God. But in spite of the fact that he is revealed, he remains still unknown. That is what we call dialectics of the world religions. And particularly when people are hit hard, when they have the theodicy problem and they are suffering, like Auschwitz or a brain surgery or divorce or whatever, then things get dark, and then people don't know anymore. Jesus on the cross cried out Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? So he reveals the Father, and then the Father becomes dark. But Jesus holds on to the God who remains after the God of theism had collapsed. So we have these 2 things. God reveals himself, but in spite of the fact that he has revealed himself, there is a lot of things which remain dark and unknown, Akhenaton, the hidden God, and so on. You have that in Luther, Calvin, and in all great religious people. Okay, so now what does he see? He goes into the city, and the city was full of temples. Like America, every city has all the churches. So Athens was full of temples, and the statues stood before the temple. So Apollo, Zeus, and so on, they were not inside of the temple, or Aphrodite, and so on, but they were all outside. And they were beautiful human figures, idealized human beings, who represented the gods on Olympus. I flew over the Olympus a few years ago. It's all empty now. But they were all sitting there, and then their statues were in Athens. So, and now for this Jew, there, Paul, that is, what is it called here? It is revolted him, his whole soul revolted. He started vomiting over the whole thing. Why? For the Jews, the faith came through hearing through the ear. For the Greeks, faith came from seeing. They saw these statues, and that made them into faithful people. That is one thing. But another thing is, from Abraham on, and we have the Abraham religions, Islam, Abraham religions, Christianity, Abrahamic religions, Judaism. Abraham had this vision of the one God. For some time, the one God and the others still around, and then the others disappeared slowly through the prophets and so on. And there was this one God and nothing else, and there was nothing outside of God, and no addition. Muhammad says no addition to God, and so on. So this monotheism then broke through, and from this, and with Paul at that time, it had already developed. And so therefore, in terms of this one God, now these were all idols. The prophet had said, you know, they have eyes and they cannot see, they have legs and they cannot walk, and so on, and making jokes about them, and so on. They are the product of our hands. We have made them ourselves. We take a piece of wood, and then part of it we make into a god, the other part we burn in the stove, and so on. So the prophets continually attack all these idols. And maybe one reason of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, which was there in Athens, which was there in Babylon, which was in Rome, which was in Athens and everywhere. If you walk through the area and you talk and say, your gods, they cannot see and have eyes, and you made them yourself, it's ridiculous, and so, of course they hate your gods. So this monotheism may very well be one of the causes of this anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism. So, well, Paul comes into the city. He is not yet in the public sphere. He begins there, and it says here, and he went to the synagogue. In the synagogue he held, somehow, it's hard to read there. So he had debates there with the Jews and the God-fearing. So he does not go into the public sphere right away. He goes into the synagogue. So we want to make that clear from the very beginning when we meet here or so, in the church or have mass or so. That's not the public sphere. That is the private sphere. Like when you sit at home on your couch or whatever and talk with each other in the family and so on. So we have to differentiate clearly between the public sphere and the private sphere. So that going to the synagogue there, that is still, he goes to the God-fearing and to the Jews, as he always does. But in the marketplace, now it gets slowly public. He goes into the marketplace, and there, what happens to him there? He had debates every day with anyone who would face him. So he stands in the marketplace. Now that is where we make the transition from the private into the open into the public. So even a few Epicureans and Stoics, philosophers, argued with him. Some said he is a parrot who is somehow, what is he all about, this little parrot? So he may have had a Greek accent, he spoke Greek, but he may have had an accent, and so he sounded like a little parrot. And so they did not take him very seriously, and he was preaching about Jesus and the resurrection, and so others said he sounds like a propagandist for some outlandish gods. So he doesn't have a good reception, as we would say. So therefore, if you go from the private sphere and to the public sphere, it needs some kind of courage. They may say that you are a parrot, or they may say that you are a propagandist for something, you may be misunderstood all over the place, and so on. And so that happened to Paul there. And we want to stop there, and we go on with the reading the next time, and we want to go through the whole Athens affair, but we know a little bit already that it is not easy for believers to go into the public sphere, not then and not today, because the whole abyss between the religious and the secular has deepened since modernity. And therefore, to go into the public sphere and to argue in terms of the Catholic natural law, or in terms of the New Testament, or in terms of the Hebrew Bible, and so on, that can be very, very difficult. It needs a translation. Religion needs new translators who can speak adequately. And you hear when you turn the Catholic television channel on, you see it does not fit, really. It's not fit. We have not done it. We had a bishop there in the 60s, 50s or 60s and so on, who was a television bishop and who had developed some skills and so on in order to do that. But it is very difficult to move from the sphere of the private religious sphere into the public sphere. In order for a moment to see how deep this abyss is, just think, from a Jewish point of view, just think you go into a synagogue and the rabbi reads the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, and there he says, that the world is 6,000 years old. And then you turn the television on, or you read a physics book and so on, then you see the world is 14 billion years old. 14 billion years. And the first billion years there was a dark cloud over the whole thing. And then the sun which shines on us is 10 billion years old. And the earth is 5 billion years old. There was a sun and there was no earth yet. It hadn't formed yet. The earth was, when it was about 5 billion to 4 billion years old, an impact came. A huge body flew into this earth, and it dissolved and spread all over the place, and then it collected itself again, and parts of the earth material formed the moon. That means the earth lived about 1 billion years without any moon whatsoever, and only through the moon our climate became balanced and shaped and so on. So when you think just for a moment about this, we came maybe 10 million years ago, we evolved, and the first probably by 9 million years, some of us did not only go from the trees to the savanna, but they also went back into the water. And recently they developed this theory that we somehow joined the fish again because there was more food in the water than otherwise. And our babies, when they are born, you can throw them into water and they swim right away. The chimpanzee babies don't do that. So we have a particular closeness to the water where we may have come from. But when we slowly began to walk on 2 legs, it took millions of years. And so what we have 1.5 million years ago, we have a little person in Africa who could walk already. Some crocodile bit her in her backside, and she walked upright already. So this long, and then these religions here, this book here, that was written between the culture in Euphrates and Tigris 3,500 years ago. And on the other hand, the Nile civilization 3,000 years ago. Just think of that. That was yesterday. The whole thing was yesterday. So if you go to the Hindu, we have just written this summer, we wrote 4 books. They were all printed in India, and here, this comes from India. That's the Indian Hindu Trinity here, and that is the Buddha here, and so on. That is, was only 2,500 years ago. And the Chinese civilization 2,000 years ago. So these are all, when you think that we are maybe 5 million years old or 10 million years old, that was just in the last 5 seconds of our existence, so new all that is. This writing there, which comes from the Chaldeans in Euphrates and Tigris and from the Nile River and so on. Before that, nobody wrote. 10,000 years ago, we were all hunters and fishermen and so on. Had no private property, nothing. Private property comes only with the villages, and then 10,000 years ago, then small towns and city-states, then come wars. Private property has something to do with wars, just wars. That means we want to have rubber in Vietnam, we want to have coffee in El Salvador, we want to have oil in Iraq, and so on. So this issue of private property, you know, we have in our own Catholic history, the greatest saint, St. Francis, he went to the marketplace one day, and he took off his clothes and he stood nakedly on the marketplace of Assisi and threw all his clothing into the lap of his father, who was one of the early capitalists, the early profiteers, and so on. He said, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And the bishop went to the middle and put his raincoat around him so that he wouldn't stand there naked in public, and so on. So, and then recently I read one of his biographers from the 13th century. One day, St. Francis came back from Spain, and he found out that his friends in Assisi had moved into a new house, and he ordered them all to leave the house, by the way. Even the sick people had to leave the house. To have a possession, to own a house, was the ruin of everything. So he took them all out again, put them into caves, and so on. So the radical, he is the greatest thing. That means he's closest to Jesus, Jesus' teaching, and so on. There is, from the very beginning, there is the opposition, and at that time, private property was already maybe 9,000 years old. But there was this deep feeling, and then the Pope forced Francis to have property, at least for the order. He didn't want the order to have any property. When you go to Three Rivers and look at the Benedictine orders, the Anglican Benedictines, they do have property. The individual monks are without property, but the order has property, land, and so on. So Innocence, the most powerful Pope, forced little Francis to have that the order had to have property, and he obeyed. He never want to become a priest or whatever. He didn't want to have anything to do with the clergy. They were all corrupt, and so on. But he obeyed the Pope, and there was at least property for the Franciscans have monasteries and so on. But all our orders are communistic. So I don't understand recently when the Pope went to Cuba and argued against communism, he must have forgotten completely not only that the early church was communistic and they had all things in common and they sold everything and so on, but that all the orders who are represented in Rome today, they're all communistic. So maybe he thinks that religious communism is okay and secular communism is not okay, but he should say so. So nevertheless, that is our issue now. And when we said that about capitalism, that is, of course, we are living in the most advanced capitalistic country ever, with the most powerful bourgeois ruling class. We had never any nobility whatsoever. Lord Baltimore came for 3 years and left as fast as possible. The Canadians had some, and Mexico had some, but we never had. So we are the purest of all purists. And we have to see that when we go into the public sphere and want, for instance, to take our social encyclical letters from Leo XIII on to Benedict XVI, you don't get it into the public sphere. When I wanted to teach that in Baltimore, the Jesuits said, you will lose all friends if you do that. I said, well, I'll try it anyway. So I didn't lose all friends, but I didn't win any neither. So the social encyclical letters are the most well-kept secret in the American church and have always been that way. When the Irish were all poor, they couldn't even read it. And after they moved up with Kennedy to the upper middle class, not to the upper class, but just to the upper middle class, then they could read it, but they didn't want to read it anymore because now they had it and they didn't want this to be taken away from them, so they didn't read them anymore. So this is a peculiar thing as far as our situation is concerned. So public sphere is our theme, but the public sphere is not only formal, it has a content, and there are very specific things which come up every day and every day. You know that the church in America now has charged Obama because Obama wants all employers to pay for contraceptives. The Catholic Church teaches against contraceptives, therefore they don't want to pay for this. Then Obama said, well, the insurance will pay. But that was a lawyer's trick because the church pays the insurance and then they pay indirectly for contraception anyway. So they went to court anyway. So that is just a tiny little fragment that goes on and on and on. Now, we have churches which sing all day long, it's all right, it's all right, it's all right. Nothing is all right. Nothing is all right. So if in the church we want to sing all right, that's all right too. But if we want to be thinking people and reflect, then we must know that's not all right. So there is a deep abyss, and I just told you these numbers, right? So if you take physics, for instance, they have the secular side, which thinks in those billions of years, and then you have the Abrahamic religions who think in terms of 6,000 years. Adam and Eve and all the little animals and crocodiles and mice and everything, 6,000 years. So it just does not fit. And so it goes through the whole view of what we know about the world. And so how we then, if we still have a religious belonging and we want to hold on to this, how do we go over and make that clear or translate this in such a way that it becomes meaningful for people who have left all that behind and follow the sciences, not only the university but also in their lives with contraceptives. That's all science. The pill is chemistry, and it was invented in the 60s, and the capitalists here paid $10 million for it, and they put the whole working class on it. So that is science, right? And so that is the problem of the public sphere. Now, so that is our reading for today, and we will go a little bit further the next time. But what I would like to do is just to introduce us for a moment by a little trailer, and Dustin will be on it, I will be on it. So you see, it's for you too particularly, because David, I think, has seen, Walter may have seen it. So we tried, I had my birthday on Saturday, and we had a nice celebration, and we didn't get the sound, so now we will have the sound. So for a moment we can sum it up, what our background is and our vocabulary and so on, so that will maybe be helpful. So that is just a few pictures about my background, so that you know where I'm coming from.
In the winter of 1943, a German
Can we hear it, or is it loud enough?
Siebert family of Frankfurt had asked for young Rudy Siebert. But at gunpoint, the
I look like that
was led
also.
off to become part of Adolf Hitler's Nazi war machine. This one moment would change the direction of worldwide
It's a cathedral in Berlin.
studies. Professor Rudolf J. Siebert has had many such moments during his life as a young religious student, soldier, prisoner of war, German Reconstruction scholar, professor of comparative religion, political activist, author, lecturer, and the foremost proponent of the critical theory of religion. His opinions and philosophical ideas are known and respected throughout the world.
That was after they came. That was in August 1943. So at that time I was 15 years old, and it was the beginning of the saturation bombing of the cities. And so, of course, I did not want to go. It's a strange word, the critical theory of religion. We don't have to go into this, but we do this as a bridge through which one can translate on what is on the religious side and bring it into the public sphere. But the reason why one goes into the public sphere, why religious people may go there, is because there will be no peace among the nations without peace among the world religions, and there will be no peace among the world religions without discourse, and there cannot be any discourse without the religions knowing each other, knowing their own thing, and knowing each other, and so in order to make a contribution to the peace among the nations. So therefore it is not entirely arbitrary, can people stay out of it or not. I think there is a certain obligation that religious people enter the public sphere, taking into consideration the precariousness of the civilizations and the struggles from, just remind us of the Arabic Spring, from Tunisia through Egypt and up to Lebanon and so on. So, and we have changed in the meantime. We shift again from the Near East to the Far East, where our greatest opponent, namely a completely communistic country, where the most capitalistic countries